Hey everyone, welcome to the second project for Material Space and Meaning. This is, gotta pull this up here. This is the Theme and Variation Project. And as we sort of mentioned during the last project, in the arc of the class, we go from sort of more restrictive to less restrictive. So this project does have some restrictions about it, but it also has started to generate some freedoms too, have some freedoms there that you folks can enjoy playing with. So what I'm going to do in this video is to give you the project description. Then I'm also going to show you how to use perhaps some of the other tools in the shop to work with the cardboard a little bit. And then finally I'm going to show you some reference artists that can help you, give you some ideas, offer you some ideas. So I'm not going to be quite as restrictive as I was last time, in which I wouldn't show you anything. Here I'm going to give you some ideas. You may be able to borrow a few things from some other artists, but generally speaking, you're going to be generating things from your own observations and through a developmental process. If you pull up that project description, one of the things that you will notice, please do that by the way, one of the things that you will notice is a quote directly underneath the theme and variation title at the top, and it's a quote by the painter Paul Cézanne. Paul Cézanne was a early modernist painter who kind of bridged representation and abstraction. And what he has was a number of quotes, but the one here is, "The eye is turned through contact with nature." What does that mean? The eye is sharpened, the eye is changed, the mind is changed, the eye is transformed, you could say, through contact with nature. And so what we're going to be doing, what I'm asking you folks to do in the course of solving this problem, is actually take Paul Cézanne's advice and kind of follow what he did most of his life, and to go into nature and to start using nature as a source material, using nature as a way to generate ideas. Because one of the things that you will notice as I read the project description here in a minute is a similar thing that happened to last time, and that I will give you a project description. It's very difficult to try to solve this by imagining it beforehand. So I intentionally create problems sometimes in order to, especially early on in the semester, that do not allow students to kind of preconceive what they are doing, and instead they have to go through a developmental process. And that developmental process is key. We want to learn that, we want to internalize that to really learn how to become creative individuals, and particularly how to make art. So that one, like this one, like the previous one, we're going to be going through a developmental process for your projects. This project has a couple different purposes that are listed. The first is to make something extraordinary out of mundane materials through an application of work and creative focus. I mean that quite seriously. That's not just like some dreamy art talk, but that is that most of the materials that surround us, and there's just about nothing more mundane, frankly, than cardboard, which is what we're going to be using for this project. There's just about nothing, all the materials that are around us, have qualities about them. They have potential, but by themselves, that potential is really quite inert. And so it's the goal of the artist, it's the goal of the creative person, to sort of pull that out and to work with what the material is doing, the magic stuff of that material, in order to create something genuinely special. And that's the goal in this. And that's probably the biggest goal, is to learn how to apply ourselves, take some really nondescript, unspecial material and transform it through an application of energy. That's a big, big idea. And we like to pursue that a lot down here. Another purpose is to learn about visual theme and variation in art, using particularly visual images. In this case, where I'm asking you to extrapolate visual images from nature, but there are a lot of places to gather visual imagery. But this idea of theme and variation in art is sort of a foundational one, and that virtually every artwork that you look at has some basis of theme and variation. There are motifs and ideas that are interwoven in that thing that give it unity, that give it expression. Very, very seldom do you actually find an artwork that sort of rejects the idea of theme and variation. It happens on a lot of different ways, and it might not be like obviously apparent, but in some of the more contemporary works. But theme and variation is a very foundational idea, and we see it in music, where you got every song is like verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus. You know, it's like those verses and those choruses are the motifs. They are the building blocks that that song is built on. You know, that song is structured within. It's sort of like the architecture of that song. And visual art is no different. If you think about the paintings of Jackson Pollock, there's a lot of people besides Jackson Pollock, but I think everybody knows Jackson Pollock's splash paintings. The motifs of sort of, you know, line and shape and splashing and texture. I mean, all of those things are sort of like patterns. They're not exactly the same from one to the next, like a wallpaper pattern, but they are motifs, visual motifs that give that thing structure, give that thing, its meaning, really. Okay, so theme and variation in nature. And the third one is to work with volumetric form. And so we want to get a good description of that moving into the project as well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. First, we probably need to define a few definitions for ourselves, a few terms for ourselves. If you want to take yourselves back in your mind, this may be a painful memory for some of you, but back to like a high school geometry class where you learned about planes and shapes and volumes and sort of, you know, all of that sort of really wonderful geometry. For the purposes of this project, we are going to say a planar form is, it's basically it's kind of a sheet of cardboard, but a planar form is a form that has depth and width, but not thickness. I know this has a little bit of thickness, and that's the part we're just going to kind of forget about for this. But for the purposes of this project, this would be a plane. For the purposes of the project, this would be a volume. A volume is space in three directions, like length, width, and height. So we want to be clear that we are talking about volumetric form, which is form that's more like this, not necessarily round. It could be square and angular and shaped and have all these different shapes, but it's volume. It's things in which there is an area inside that's substantial and not just a flat plane like this. Another term that I use from time to time, artists use from time to time, that can be helpful is the idea of negative space. Negative space is really the space between things. If I hold in my hands, it's like the space in between my fingers like this. You look up at the leaves, at the sky through the leaves of a tree, the sky between the leaves, that's negative space. Space that recedes away from you also can be termed negative space. Like if you're standing in front of a cave, like that's a negative space, that would be there. And motif we have already talked about enough, I think, to kind of get a sense of what the project is about. So moving down to the project requirements. The project requirement. Here we go. This is the description. You are to make a non-representational project that explores the idea of theme and variation in volumetric form. Again, we've talked about we've talked about non-representational in the previous project, which means it's abstract. You know, we don't want it to look like anything. The other thing we want to sort of unpack here for a second is theme and variation, and what that looks like. Or it's like it's hard to, if I have like one of these objects right here, like this bottle, lousy solution, but this bottle, and I have like one of them, there's not enough to be motif. A motif is actually repeated. Theme and variation are things where there are things that are ideas, visual structures and patterns and imagery that are similar or identical from one to the next to the next to the next. And then the variation is the interruption. There's a dance between these two. So there's conversations between different types of visual experiences or different types of aesthetic logics, you might say, that are occurring in the work. So you're going to have to, for this project, it's not enough to sort of like make one thing. No, it's not enough to find a pattern and make a lot of one pattern. Probably not. You're probably going to have to make a lot of different kinds of patterns or similar types of 2 or 3 patterns and work with those and create a structure that's engaging. Okay? It's difficult for me to describe this because this is a developmental process. This needs to be sort of driven by you. What you don't need to do is to say, Ken, what do you want me to give? What I've already given you is a goal out there. And what you need to do then is to try to figure out, how can I sort of satisfy this? A little scary, a little fun. So hopefully that'll be, we'll walk through this developmental process together. There's an in-process critique, we'll have conversations, and we'll get you to a successful project at the end of this. to start this project, what I would like you to do is to get yourself out in nature. And so this is not just like, wouldn't it be cool if you could sit on a park bench for a few minutes and work on this? No, this is, I want you to be Cezanne for a few minutes, for an hour roughly. Get yourself out into nature. So find something, backyard, okay, maybe park, better, nature center. If you can do it, fantastic. But someplace where you can look out and see things that are not made by people. Nature is really the source of almost everything for the artist. Certainly we're informed by culture, certainly we're informed by art history, that's all a conversation. But the source for everything, I mean the literal source of all of our materials comes from the natural world. The source of, you know, these foundational ideas in design and structure and space and all that, those are found in nature as well. So we want to immerse ourselves in that. So get out, get a sketchbook, sit there, look at nature for a while. Maybe don't pick up your phone. I want you to make some drawings. And I want you to look around and find some things in that environment. 10 drawings, like last time. Quick drawings, 1, 2, maybe 3 minutes, but capture information. Don't, you know, use the drawing process as a way to sort of capture information, seeing things that you maybe didn't see before. When I did this, you know, kind of prepping for this assignment and this talk, I was at a nature center. I was fortunate to be able to go to one. And I sat there for a long time, and I just said, what do I see? Like I see like insects, a lot of insects, you know, butterflies and flowers and trees with all these leaves in them, you know, theme and variation. You look at the branches on a leaf. Are you kidding me? Theme and variation? They're a fantastic example of kind of theme and variation because all those leaves are the same, but they're not really the same. They're the same overall structure. They have motifs in there, but they're not identical. Or I was looking at the pattern of the dragonfly kind of whipping past me again and again, and just sort of even tracking that. And so if you start to look around you, you can extrapolate. You can find some things, patterns, images, ideas, even just like drawing things that are in front of you, and develop 10 of those. Put them in your sketchbook. Then come back and start tinkering with them in the studio. How are you going to translate that? Because remember, you can't make the flower. I'm not allowing you to make a flower. But what you have to do is maybe you can extrapolate some of the pattern. You know, all of those flowers, you get out in the, you know, the black-eyed Susans and all of the different kinds of beautiful flowers, you know, that are present out there, and they have structures. And maybe you can borrow some of that structure. Maybe you can abstract from that structure. Maybe you can abstract from the dragonflies, the pattern, the path of that dragonfly going through the sky. Maybe you can abstract from the, you know, the patterns of black on orange on a monarch butterfly's back, you know, on the wings. You know, so there are a lot of ways to extrapolate from and extract from. And what I would like you to do is to do precisely that, to sort of look around that environment, find some things, and, you know, with an eye towards, you know, this assignment, to start capturing some things. The really cool thing about this is that as people of faith, if you call yourself a person of faith, you know, this is not just a mute exercise. This is one of those points of intersection between the things that we do down here in the studio program and larger ideas about spirituality that we often pursue. And this is, you know, so many times we're having to force these things, you know, or work hard to find connections. I got to tell you, you know, you start looking at the book of Job, you start looking at Genesis, you start looking at the Psalms, you start looking at, you know, certain Colossians and certain sections of Romans and whatnot, you find the idea over and again and again and again that God made this world and he made it for us to enjoy. And it's only through, you know, kind of the Western, Western ideas of dualism that we have started to look at the natural world with a jaded eye and say, well, we really shouldn't trust it so much. It's like, well, I don't want to have that discussion too much, but it's important that we sort of recognize when we look at this world around us, you know, this natural world, it's a fantastic source of information and ideas at the very least. For those of us that have a faith, it's more than that. So it's an opportunity for us to start to connect some of those dots and just celebrate those. It's not anything you have to put language on. It's not anything you have to force into a project. You can just enjoy it. So. Okay, the next thing that I want to show you is how, some basic strategies for working with the cardboard, cutting, bending, folding, shaping, gluing, things like that, to just get you started, get you into some initial ways of sort of generating form, generating, volumetric form. If you look at the project guidelines, down on the towards the bottom, there's first one that says create something more than it's just cardboard and glue. Yes, absolutely. We've kind of talked about that a little bit already. Application of energy and creative energy and work, you're going to get to some great results. The second one, cardboard boxes. Nope, not allowed. Okay, so what do I mean by that? You are not allowed to solve this by making cardboard boxes. If I see another cardboard box in the world does not need another cardboard box. So you are going to have to make some other kind of shapes, some other kind of structures in volumetric form. So you're going to have to think about that. I've got some ideas here about how you can start to construct those things. But right from the get-go, let's get that out of our minds, because this is going to be way better than a stack of cardboard boxes. As delightful as Christmas is with those stacks of boxes, that's not where we're going. So, in terms of working with these materials, first thing we're familiar with the hot glue gun, right? For cutting the cardboard, we have these utility knives. They work great. Because this is a communal studio space down here, we keep all of the utility knives back over in a bin over there. There's a pretty good chance when we come down here to work that when you pull it out and you kind of like touch this blade, the blade is like the very tip is going to be rounded, it's going to be maybe not cut very well. And so the first thing I'm going to show you is how to change this blade. Okay, so you can see that the utility knife has a little screw right there. So just take the screwdriver. Phillips head, regular head doesn't work. Both of them work for this task. And if I open this up, you can see that blade that's right in there. And this blade is the part that you replace. And so it looks like that. And I replaced this before, so this is the part that was being used before, and it's quite dull. So I can touch that, not any danger I'm going to get cut off of that thing. So I want to put the sharper side out. So I'm just going to take this blade like it was, stick it in there like that, okay? And you can see like right here, there's a little paper, some wax paper folded over some other blades. So these are spare blades here, okay? And we also have a bunch of spare blades in the, right, okay, I'm going to get that in there, where that goes. There we go. There's more of these spare blades in the bin where we keep all of the knives. So I'm just going to put this together. Try it before I put the screw in. Yes, works great. Put that screw back in. We are good to go. Nice clean blade. Nice fresh sharp blade. And you can also see that I've got some wood right here, a piece of plywood right here. With these big sheets of cardboard, it's going to be super tempting to grab one of them, mark something out, lay it down on the floor, kneel down on it, and start cutting. You do whatever you want, and there are situations where that might actually work well. Well, let me just toss out a few ideas. The first is that if you are kneeling down on a piece of cardboard, you dent it, right? Okay, so maybe just be careful about that. The second thing, more importantly, is that when you are cutting on a piece of stone or concrete, you're going to dull this blade after you cut about that far. The blade is effectively shot. So maybe don't do that. So you can cut on a piece of wood like this. There's a million benches in the other room. You can cut on all of those. There's actually a big wood floor in this major sculpture studio. You can cut on that. That works better too. Or if there's, all of those spaces are taken, you can take another piece of cardboard, put it down, and cut on that piece of cardboard. It's two pieces where the first one, you just kind of sacrifice the first one that's on the bottom and cut on that. So what I'm going to do is just make a few cuts on this to just generally show you the strategy. I think probably this is not a gigantic surprise for anyone that you would use a ruler. Hold this ruler down and just draw the knife across this. You can do it more than once. You don't have to apply a lot of muscle to this. Sometimes if you're pulling, pushing harder, it's a tendency to maybe like slip and get a bad cut or injure yourself. So just, you don't have to go fast. You can just go nice and slow. Wow, look at that. First time. Often you have to, go back and get a part or two, cut a little bit more on a section or two. But, a pretty easy, way to make these cuts. I would generally, use a straight edge that works really well. Later in this video, I'll show you how to use some of the shop tools to cut curves. This is actually not a great tool to cut curves because the blade is so wide. We use a bandsaw for that, it works great. So that's another strategy. But a couple of things that I can show you here. Here's a cool one. Let me cut a little piece as an example. Let's say, there we go. Let's say that you wanted to curve this cardboard. It's like, how would you do that? It's like, well, you can go like this. Maybe do it a lot. But that's pretty rough, isn't it? Okay, so I've got a good trick for this. So if you look at the cardboard, like right here, you can see like the edges of the corrugation, which means that there's paper that's kind of folded that's going like this all the way through. So if you find this edge right here, and take something dull, like a screwdriver. You don't want a sharp knife, you want like a dull screwdriver like this, and just find one of those corrugations, and just draw the screwdriver down right down the center, and just tear the paper. Hopefully I've positioned the camera so you can actually see what I'm doing here. Whoop. And it goes pretty fast because I don't have particularly a fantastic skill about this. The screwdriver wants to like fit into those corrugations, so it really is not difficult to make all of these. Okay, you ready for this now? Ready? That's what that looks like. One side and not the other. Look at that. That's how you make a gorgeous little curve right there. Okay. Other ways that you can begin to work with this material. Sometimes if people are making, geometric forms, they'll say, well, I have this plane over here, I have this plane over here, then they'll take, and they'll try to glue it. Oh, let's see. They maybe have this and they want to, have a side like this, so they'll take it, run a little glue along here, put it on. Certainly you can do it that way. Also, what you can do is just cut partway through. Okay, just halfway through. Whew, look at that. That's nice. And that's really stiff, great edge, great straight edge, and you can do this a lot. So maybe there's a website that I have listed on Moodle. There's a link on Moodle. It's a website called Patterns of Paper Polyhedra. Oh, look at that. Oh, that works okay. We've got this little, sort of a little house, or a little five-sided figure. It's not quite geometric. But there's a website called Patterns for Paper Polyhedra, and what it's used for, or what it is a series of 100 or more patterns about regular and irregular solids, how to make these, and they're actually patterns if you wanted to make them out of paper, and it's a great resource. By themselves, the forms they're strictly geometric. And probably the best way to think about that is, let's say you wanted to make like an Egyptian pyramid shape. It's like, well, you can do the geometry and do a lot of math and whatnot, try to figure that out, or you could go there and download the pattern and sort of extrapolate from that. And so it's a pretty simple, straightforward pattern, not that complicated, pretty easy to steal from, or borrow from that website. So I don't care if nobody uses it, I don't care if everybody uses it, it's just a resource, but take a minute, like even just stop this video, take a minute and go on there and look at, there's some like 100-sided objects on there that are so just beautifully, crazy complicated, just wonderful objects to look at. if you had a lot of time and you want. I've had a couple of students go after the really complicated ones. They're super fun and they're so elegant when you see them in cardboard, but they're complicated. So anyhow, take a look. It's a resource. Use it if you want. You know, not necessary. Certainly from my perspective, it's just a resource. So, making curves like this, as opposed to like cutting and slicing and dicing. Another thing to do too, rather than, you know, if you have something that you really need to, you know, have a lot of strength, you know, a lot of people will glue, you know, things like this. You know, with the hot glue, that works pretty well. But if you have problems with things like tearing off a lot, another thing that you can do too is make a little glue tab like this, hot glue on one side. Be careful with that hot glue, it is hot. You know, a little glue tab like that, not particularly elegant, but if it's hidden, man, is that thing strong. Like if you want to make cardboard furniture, you know, this would be the way to go, a strategy like that. So, a couple different easy techniques for working with it. I think I've covered changing the blade. Hot glue, there's more hot glue sticks over there, no problem. Okay, that's good. So a couple other project guidelines we need to talk about. We got maybe a few minutes left and then we'll take you over and show you some other things and some other artist examples. You know, later in this video, I'm showing you some examples by professional artists whose work deals with volumetric form in a variety, a whole spectrum of maybe you could say aesthetic logic or different kind of aesthetic approaches for that. So a couple other project guidelines that are listed on here. Let's see. No cardboard boxes. Also, you can't just glue stuff on a flat piece of cardboard. So you can't just take something like this, you know, make something solid and like glue it on here, you know, like barnacles on a ship. Nope. This is a thing that's not a volume. So you gotta, the whole thing has to be volumetric. Also, the project must be freestanding and solidly construction. You can't just like stack things, like make a bunch of things and sort of pile them together. Nope, it's got to, like everything's glued together so that when we pick it up, the whole thing comes with us. No size restrictions. Have some fun. You know, we got 4 by 6 foot sheets of cardboard and we got a lot of them, you know. And so if you're looking after interesting solutions, maybe you could take advantage of the fact that we have a big studio and it's easy to stretch out. You could have a lot of fun, you know, doing some expansive things in this studio. So here's a very large idea, and that is, you know, the third or fourth point down here, be on the lookout for better solutions that may arise while you are working on your project in big and small ways. It's pretty likely that this will happen to some degree. Absolutely true, and this is important enough that I bring it up for almost every project, so you probably, you know, hear me say it fairly often. That the initial ideas that we have, whether they're sort of like these light bulb moments that go off, or you know, you're looking at somebody else's, like maybe one of the artists that we're discussing here in a little bit, you get an idea from here and an idea from there. Those are important and those are solid, but they're almost never the final answer to the thing that, you know, the best possible option. And so, you know, when I say be on the lookout for better solutions, what I'm not saying is because you are young and sort of inexperienced artist, or because you're not an art major, you know, you probably don't know what you're doing. That's not it at all. What I'm saying is that humans are actually, like, we are actually not very good at sort of imagining potential solutions. We're very good at working within a process. Our imaginations within that process is really powerful, but our imagination sort of untethered from physicality, which those initial ideas often are. You know, it's not very strong. And better things, you're going to find better things along the way. You know, you're going to find, on the trail, you find little bits of gold here and there. And don't be walking past those, because that's where, you know, that's where all the great stuff is. And this, again, not because you're young, but just like old artists like me. You know, this is how it works for me too. You know, so, you know, take that advice. Another thing I would say, you know, like curved surfaces, negative spaces, exposed corrugation, different types of construction techniques, you know, and creating compelling negative spaces. are great ways to enliven your project. So, sometimes, what can happen is you're working on a project, you get to a point, it's like, wow, it's okay, it's just okay, and, what can I do to sort of like get this thing going? Maybe thinking about adding some contrasting notes, or thinking about, some contrasting visual ideas, or expanding it, or adding some of these, or putting some other elements in there. So, with the idea of theme and variation, to circle back to that again just for a moment, the notion is that you are developing different types of patterns that are going to be interacting. Like being out in nature, you see that all the time. It's like berries in a bush. It's like the round things, and then the leafiness of the bush, or the different sort of structures that you are finding, different patterns of the way that even like plants exist in a prairie landscape, or things like that. There's a lot of potential to be found in sort of just making things not necessarily, I wouldn't say non-directional, but making things in a perhaps more speculative way. To say, this is an object that I like a lot. I'm just going to invest in like maybe making a half a dozen, or 8 or 10 or 12 of these things, and seeing what I can do. And then I'm going to make, maybe the same amount of something else, and then I'm going to maybe try some other sort of visual stuff over here, and then I'm going to start putting things together. That can be a great way to solve the problem. So, some of you probably have some really like the light bulb. Oh, I got the idea. I know what I want to try first, and then you go after that. But if you are perhaps just like wondering, well, I don't really know how to begin this, maybe just start by developing some engaging visual structures and playing with that, starting with that. So. Okay, next we're going to take just a brief walk over to the shop and look at a few potential ways to use the tools over there to expand our capabilities in making. So there are a couple tools in the shop that work pretty well for cutting cardboard. If you think about it, cardboard is just a different form of a tree, and so there's a couple of these tools that work great for that. To be clear, you don't have to use any of these tools. They just open up some capabilities. One of the things that I talked about in my earlier shop demonstration was that all of these tools in here, you really need to think about them, not necessarily in should I or should I not use them for this or that, but just think about them in terms of capabilities. They all offer different strategies for working with materials, some advantages, and there are a couple here that have pretty distinct advantages. The first one is the table saw, believe it or not. This is, for cutting sheet goods. If you have like the big 4x6 sheets of cardboard that you're all getting, you can't easily just take a utility knife, cut it down with a utility knife, that's fine. But you could also come in here, maybe set this, I'm not going to start with a 4x6 sheet, but I'm going to have a slightly smaller sheet, right here. And I'm just going to say, well, I just want to cut this in half. I want a nice square cut. So I set the fence over here where I want it. It's, the blade size is great. So there you go, a really quick and simple, very straight, super precise cut, and that's one thing you could do. It's like, well, why would I do all of that when I just want one cut? Well, maybe for one cut it's less helpful, but let's say that you had a project where you wanted a lot of small cuts, or several smaller cuts. Then this tool really starts to shine in those circumstances. So I moved the fence over again, so there's about maybe 4 or 5 inches in here. I'm just approximating for my demonstration. Were I actually doing this instead of not as a demonstration, I would go over, definitely turn on the vacuum system because it is putting a little dust in the air. But for today, we're not going to do that. So you can see that, in this kind of an application, it makes very precise cuts, very, very fast, very easy. So if I had a larger project where I wanted a lot of stuff that was all the same, width, this would be a great tool to just knock out a lot of it and then take these, use them for whatever you want it to use them for. So it's perhaps better for repetitive things where you want a lot of accuracy, cutting strips or cutting larger things in half. This is probably the tool to go. Otherwise, I'm guessing that a utility knife might just get you to the same place a little easier. Another tool that works really great for cutting materials, and this, if you're cutting any kind of curves with cardboard, utility knife really doesn't work well because the blade is so wide. And so this tool will help you cut curves in a really great way. So I'm just going to do a quick demonstration to show you. The guard is down about where it needs to go. So I'm just going to freehand it here. So I had some experience with the tool, so I maybe go faster than you would, and I also wasn't following any lines or anything, so it's very easy for me to kind of whip it through, but still, I get a very fluid line. It's quite nice. It's great for cutting curves, even pretty tight curves. So this works terrific, and you can also cut, as I'll show you here in a second, you can also cut more than one piece at a time. So I'm going to use these three, and I'm just going to round this off a little bit, just doing it all at once. That's a pretty ugly curve right there. But I wanted to make it a little rough because I wanted to show you one other tool over here that you can use. But you can see that you actually can cut fairly tight curves. If I really was doing this for real, I probably would have marked that with a light pencil line and taken my time and just gotten that line exactly how I wanted it. But I wanted to be able to show you this and how this next tool can kind of fix this sort of rough curve on that situation. This next tool is the belt sander that you can use to maybe smooth out something. This is probably not a tool that would get a lot of use for this project, but you can use it. It is a capability. So I had mentioned that I cut this pretty roughly, and what I'm going to do is just show you how, like using the belt sander, you can smooth that out pretty nicely. It's still a little asymmetrical, but you can see it's clearly, just took a few moments, easy to cut, and it was also easy to get all three of them, exactly the same. So a possibility for you. Again, this one probably doesn't get a lot of use, but it's one of the potential tools that can be used. And there's one other tool that I want to show you very briefly. The last tool that I wanted to mention, and I like to put this out there even though it is a bit more complicated, this is a laser cutter that we have. And that is used to cut, it actually cuts cardboard really well. I'll show you an example here in a minute. The laser cutter is a bit more complicated in that, you know, if you decide that you need something laser cut, want something laser cut, you have to work with a TA. We have a dedicated TA for the laser, and so what you do is you contact our TA and you work with them and they're able to process it for you. What the laser cutter does is it takes sheets of cardboard, you know, like this, and working with, I don't know if you can see that right there, but there's a laser that kind of comes down and it moves around and it cuts super precise patterns or whatever you design. It can cut out of the cardboard. This is an example that our previous laser TA, Matt, this is actually, believe it or not, this is that same cardboard that you folks are working with right here. So you can see the corrugations. It's almost atmospheric, it's cut so finely. But this is a piece that Matt had cut out of a piece just like the lowly cardboard, one of those 4x6 sheets. And this is the kind of precision that you can get with the laser cutter. I would say most people, you know, using this have to kind of, you know, do a project or two to figure it out, but this would be a possibility. I don't think we would have enough, you know, TA resources for everybody to use it, but for certain, and it's also kind of slow. This project, like this cut right here, probably took, you know, 30 minutes to cut this out, so it's a little bit slow. But absolutely it's a possibility for some of the projects, not only the one that you're working on right now, but things into the future. If you're an art major and you are, you know, wanting to get something cut for a graphic design project, this cuts, you know, like plexiglass. You could actually cut this shape right here with that thinness out of a piece of plexiglass. It cuts paper really well. It cuts a lot of things. We even had somebody here that cut a piece of carpet, you know, was cutting carpet samples with it, and that's a possibility as well. So it works. Absolutely, you can be an option for you working on this initial cardboard project, depending on how you can connect with my TA, make that work. But I always like to talk about this one when students are working on their cardboard projects because it does present quite an option. So, okay. Well, I think next we'll probably take a look at a few artists whose work I would define as, you know, great resources or good things to think about, pretty compelling things to think about as you're developing this project.